Alex, good to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come on the show and talk about what you're doing. I want to start off with something that you said to me last time we spoke. You said the culture of me is destroying business. Now that really stuck in my mind actually for various reasons. What exactly do you mean by that, and why do you think it's a problem?
Um, well, first things first, Paul. It's not a sort of moral crusade.
Right.
Um, I just think it's it's an outcome which has become systemic and a problem culturally and therefore commercially for business. Um, and that's my focus. I mean, that is the symptom. The cause, I think, lies else, elsewhere. And there's the business arena, which I think because often the way people behave publicly then represents itself in terms of how they behave
Mm.
in and around work.
Yeah.
And I just think that, the pandemic and the almost unthinkable changes, enforced changes to our behavior, which I think will in time be reflected upon as becoming much more deep-seated
Mm.
in terms of society and ourselves, has also kind of reflected within how we behave.
Yeah, yeah. So
In
let me just ask you though. I mean, some people would say a culture of me is good for business because it's I'm worth it. I should buy all this stuff, and that's what business wants. I mean, you're saying that that's not the case. I mean, just explain why you think it's a problem for business. Why I understand your point about it being symptomatic of something else, but why is it a problem for business? The fact that people, it's all about me and I want to buy this stuff.
So, I mean, I think about things more from a service set, B2B
Right.
perspective. Certainly if you're a sole trader and certain jobs or walks of life, it makes no difference at all. But I think, Paul, what we've seen is that businesses have evolved,
Yeah.
become much more flexible because they had to, as a result of which it was an enormous catalyst for um, the inclusion of tech within the workplace, um, digital and more recently AI at speed. What hasn't changed though is the core of how businesses are run and what's expected in terms of responsibility, decision
Mm.
making, communication, empathy, and sort of client ownership. And I think that's the parity. People now are individuals tend to optimize for self in terms of their time, their agenda, whereas clients don't care about how they just want competence and
Yeah.
an understanding of their problems. And it's very few client frustrations exist within functions. They tend to be amplified between them. And I think that is something which has become increasingly problematic.
Yeah, okay, I get that. One of the things that interests me though is that your business, I mean, the Listening Co, is all about trying to understand clients better. So that, you know, there seems to me there's a kind of a parallel there, isn't there? I mean, well, on one hand, you're saying, the world has become obsessed with me, and that has a definite impact on staffing and people wanting flexibility and what have you. But on the other hand, clients are also a bit more about me. But what you do, what your business does, is spend time trying to understand exactly what they want and why they want it and why it matters, and and how to deliver it in the best way and what have you. I mean, just let's just explore that because that seems to be a really interesting set of factors.
So I think that. that is very astute. You've got when you have challenges at both ends of the equation,
Mm.
because you know I'm talking about service set providers, but actually the recipients are facing no different a set of
Yeah.
challenges. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, uh, culture, good or bad, used to be learnt through proximity on the job, where more junior staff would look at more senior staff performing,
Mm.
and through osmosis, they would learn that way. That, to a far greater extent, has now disappeared
You mean because of things like remote working?
because of remote work. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that working from home is a bad thing, that people have become lazy or anything like that. It is just that if management think that things will just be fine despite the change, they're being left behind or already. I mean, for example, AI doesn't remove the need for empathy, um, but it certainly punishes the absence of it. It executionally speeds things up. So if the heart of your company is not right, it'll just get wrong quicker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so where we come in is, it's an independent, non-partisan set of ears to very much listen to both sides and then create a solution based upon, as I say, a third party interpretation of what's
Mm.
going on. Now, also, Paul, that there has to be an acceptance that there is a challenge, and both sides of the equation has to accept that they want a solution,
Mm.
and that either party might be, for want of a better term, slightly, at fault. But it certainly is not a finger pointing exercise. It's a finding a solution, not amplifying problems.
Yeah, and let's just explore that. So, at a practical level, what sort of clients, what sort of problem would clients, what would be the presenting problem if a client comes to you and says, "I need help listening to my customers," which is essentially what you do. I mean, what would the problem be that they're experiencing, that they can't get product market fit, or that things are? I mean, what's the problem that they experience, and how does the listening to clients better, empathizing and understanding clients better, how does that help resolve that problem?
If you're not, so again, to slightly go back to life today, in the social sense, all social media is output, not input.
Mm.
And I think a lot of clients are finding now that their service providers are talking at them
Mm.
rather than taking in, because again, slightly to go back to AI, it kicks out a whole lot of opinions based upon probability through scraping the net at a
Yeah.
rate that a human being couldn't get near. But it's not replacing wisdom. In fact,
Yeah.
the way things stand currently, there's never been a greater need for human interaction, or intervention, to perceive whether or not what AI is saying is the truth.
Yeah.
And I think the combination of lack of proximity, technology at pace, is in danger of making things more challenging,
Mm.
not less, because there's quicker execution but reduced interaction.
And how does the kind of listening stuff help with that though? I mean, at a very practical level, if, what sort of thing, what would you find out from clients that you could change as a result? I mean, I take your point about lots of things could be changed. What sort of things would clients say, actually, we're not happy about these things? What sort of things might they be?
Um, so to go back to my initial point about people now solving for self,
Yeah.
not the whole. And I think this was always human nature, Paul, but it went away
Mm.
when we weren't in meetings and doing the cultural thing through osmosis. So it's probably just amplified what was always happening. But because there were regular meetings and you were kept in check, I mean, for example, if you're anonymous, it's very easy to make all sorts of online allegations
Yeah.
and not quite, very personal attacks on people. If you actually have to walk up to somebody and front it up, that takes, a lot more guts, a lot more thought, and a lot more articulation. Um, so to go back to your question, people will tend to say things that make themselves look good.
Mm.
They will also avoid conflict at almost any price. What we're saying is, if we listen to what both sets think and they are in a safe space, we're likely to get to the truth quickly, but also, most importantly, get to the truth. Now, that saves an awful lot of time if, going back to my first point, the systemic problem with commerciality, you can, what are the signs of this? Well, it can be people grumbling, but it's much more likely to be lack of client retention, lack of revenue and profit growth,
Mm.
margin diminution, whatever. If you can stop that faster and turn it around,
Mm.
it's much easier and quicker to grow business that you've got than to have to keep going into the market and winning new stuff.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that logic. Just one question about that process. One more question about that process. I mean, just explain the role that technology plays in that. When you were describing it, I was thinking, God, got to go and talk to a load of customers. Do you use technology to help with that? I mean, what's your take on the kind of tech component to this?
So that's a really interesting point. Um, so where I think tech has an enormous role to play is that over time, you will start to find that a number of problems and a number of causes occur often.
Yeah,
So if you can then build a probability model based upon what you've observed, you can almost create, almost cookie cuts solutions to issues, and that will speed things up a lot. We have, Paul, as much as we can, um, a set of questions which are congruent, because it's very important that everyone is measured by
yeah,
the same criteria, because that's the only way you can get comparability.
yeah,
Um, the interesting thing about AI is what we sell is value add based upon particular expertise and background. Everybody has access to AI.
Mm.
So what we can't do is be apparent experts that use AI exclusively, because then we will remove any USP. But I think, very good question. It's that optimum marriage between tech implementation and human wisdom
yeah.
and nuance, if you like.
Yeah. And the human wisdom bit is, I think is still pretty valuable. I know AI can do all sorts of things, but it doesn't have wisdom. I mean, somebody said to me once, wisdom is the result of bad experience. Um, AI doesn't have bad experiences, does it? It just does what it does. It's humans that have bad experiences, and as a result, learn from it.
It does systematic stuff brilliantly,
Yeah.
the way that we hopefully moving forward never will nor should we. Um, when it comes to nuance, telling jokes, interpretation, that then I think, Paul, is a very different world. Um,
Yeah.
now, is that a good thing? Well, it depends who you ask and when you ask the question. Currently, though, I think there's never been a greater need for us human beings to do what we do best.
Mm.
And if we are allowing that to erode by taking ourselves out of the debate, then I think we're creating for society and certainly for employment a very risky situation.
Yeah, yeah, no, I would agree with that. Let me ask you about one of the other things that really interests me about business is that, I mean, to some extent, all businesses challenge the status quo because they're saying, I'm going to do it slightly differently because that's how they differentiate what they do. That's what makes them special. That's their USP or whatever, however you want to describe it. I mean, how do you feel? I mean, your business, which is all about listening to customers, I mean, lots of businesses simply don't do that. I mean, they do a thing that they do. They don't really engage with customers, certainly not as much as they could do. So I mean, your approach is quite a big challenge to the kind of conventional wisdom, the status quo. What's your take on that? I mean, has that been a good experience for you? Do you find it hard? I mean, how do clients react to that?
Really, I mean, as Henry Ford said, if you'd asked the market, they'd have wanted a faster horse.
Yeah, yeah.
Look, I think there are barnstormers and there are people that um, you know they just function not necessarily generically at a higher level, but they think differently.
Mm.
And you know, far be it from me to try and rain on that parade. In fact, it's what creates excellence. I think we're for the 98% of people that do things more normally. There is that interpret based upon fact and data's implementation the interpretation of that. I mean, to go back to what I said about, the difference between social media and social fact,
Mm.
I happen to think it is quite dangerous that in our private lives with online, we tend to be getting our information from sources where there is no editorial, no fact check. It's just narrative. Um, if we start doing that in a business sense,
Mm.
again, I think that's dangerous because anything and any people that you take to market should be doing that based upon fact, not assumption.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing that was going through my mind as you were speaking actually is that governments ought to pay attention to that actually, because if they start doing stuff that is off the wall, then we've got even bigger problems, haven't we?
They um, in a diplomacy, governments serve the electorate, but they ask them once. You can't do anything and everything by committee thereafter.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the problem now.
Mm.
Nothing gets done because the government asks again and again and again. And the mood in the camp changes a lot. I think once in power to do something, present your 3-year plan and do it.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you. about something else that interests me about the business world. I mean, again, and this is very different from government and the way government works. But in business, you've got, on the one hand, you've got this fail fast culture. We try stuff out, we do experiments, we learn from it, we adapt, we evolve, the kind of, um, the fast failure culture. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's very, very good thing to do because you move forward quicker. On the other hand, that creates or can create, failure, getting things wrong can also do a lot of harm. It can also cause problems for clients. It can lose you a lot of money. So I always think there's an interesting sort of balance there. Maybe it's not a balance, but there's an interesting tension between doing stuff, you know, what was the Facebook thing? Move fast and break things on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fact that if you do break things, it can cause an awful lot of problems. I mean, how do you? I mean, and of course, you're presumably working for clients that don't want to move fast and break things. They actually want to be cautious about how they change things, which is why they're listening, trying to listen and understand what clients want better. Presumably, what's your take on that kind of tension?
I think it's quite sector dependent. So the saying, the world's full of 10-year overnight success stories.
Mm,
There is, I think if you are very small, therefore fleet of foot, and your overheads are very limited, you can be very brave and fail fast any number of times. However, after you've failed fast for the fifth time, maybe you have in your competence. Uh, I, I think as part of this, Paula, it's just because you have a concept in tech, for example, doesn't mean that good business practice that have been right for a long time
mm,
should be ignored. As a rule of thumb, if you look at your cash flow, you look at your margin, you look at your margin management, your overheads, you get those ratios right, you manage debtor days, you're not over leveraged. As a rule of thumb, that sets you up for success.
mm.
If you keep getting those things wrong, almost regardless of how good the idea is, you won't succeed. And the listening co and listening people to people can't make a good business bad at its core. It might protract the period over which it fails, but hopefully it'll shine a light in the right areas to make the correct changes at the right minute.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I see your point there. Um, One of the other things that interests me, just moving on slightly to the role of the CEO. So, in terms of how you see your role in terms of building the business, one of the things I think is interesting, it kind of comes back to your thing about you know, listening to customers. One of the things I think that's interesting is how you, as the CEO or the leadership team, perhaps, how you kind of cut through all the noise to work out what to do. I mean, you know, strategy really is mainly about what you don't do. Because there are a billion things you could do with each 24 hours. The challenge for business is to work out what are the right things to do in that 24 hours, because we're all limited to 24 hours a day, aren't we? It's the great leveler. We only have 24 hours in a day. What's your sort of feeling about how you cut through the noise? I mean, how do you do that as a CEO?
I mean that's a really good question. I think as a CEO, you have a select and very small number of people that you listen to.
Mm,
To go back to my point, you can't do it by committee. You have to have an idea and have some eyes and ears that you trust, and to change the course by very small degrees. If you know if the sun's going down in front of you and you think you're heading east, you better turn the ship round.
Yeah.
You know, so what do we try to do? We try and remove the noise and replace that with solutions. And we try to provide the business with a compass to make sure they've got true north.
Yeah.
Um, and the question might be, is that easier for a CEO to do to an outside advisor who's got their back and has no skin in the game? Maybe. And that's another consideration, Paul. So who is our market? Is it the client services director? Well, maybe not, because the last thing that person wants is apparently a problem with their clients.
Yeah.
It could be PE investors, but do they really, does private equity really care about nuanced stuff? They just want outcomes. Now, you could argue that the right outcome will happen faster through deploying the listening co, but they're probably going to fall on the CEO much quicker than they end up coming to speak to us.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting challenge that. Um, and you mentioned the word compass there. I mean, somebody said to me that they feel they have their own leadership compass. I mean, would you say the same thing? Have you got what you kind of would think of as a leadership compass that makes sure you're pointing in the right direction?
Um, yeah, look, I mean, I increasingly stick to things that work for me.
Mm.
Um, so I think um, if you're genuine, honest, you have at least started with a plan. Now, it's not to say you don't evolve and adapt it, but at
Mm.
least start with a plan. Begin your journey with a destination at least, and stay true to yourself. And I've also certainly found that, tough as it might be, having difficult conversations sooner is much better than having them later.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's a very well made point that. I mean, I've heard lots of people talk about, when I ask people about what they've learned, one of the things they often say to me is, I wish I'd dealt with something sooner, because it very rarely gets better on its own, does it?
And I think as well, Paul, over time, you take more responsibility for your own actions.
Mm.
And death by a thousand cuts is hell on earth.
Yeah.
If you need to have a difficult conversation with somebody and terminate them, they've lost their job, they haven't lost their mind. I think in senior positions in life and business where you're influential, people are reliant upon you. First of all, that's why you get the big bucks. But second of all, you have a genuine responsibility
Mm.
to the people and the business and everything that goes with it.
Mm.
So, you're probably the one person that can influence it. If you accept the pay that comes with it, embrace the responsibilities that you also have to take on board.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in fact, that's enshrined in the legislation about directors, isn't it? Really about your responsibility to act in the interest of the company and all the rest of it. But often people don't, which I think is the thing that is a bit worrying. Let me just ask you about. I mean, you talked about having to, if you've got to deal with people, if you've got to manage people out of the business. Let me ask you about the other side to that. One of the big challenges that I hear from people is getting good people. I mean, and if you get good people on board, I mean, that is a big chunk of the battle. If you don't get the right people on it, you've got a bigger problem than you had before. What's your perspective on kind of getting the right people on the bus? Do you have a particular view about the best way to do that? Have you had experiences of that going wrong, for instance?
Um, I think it comes down, and by the way, this is a word I would use increasingly across life and business, clarity.
Mm,
And I just think, um, is it the All Blacks have a no dickheads policy? It all of us make mistakes, but I think if you, well, more the other way, as a CEO, if you can't explain the vision, the mission, and the values to your own people,
mm,
and they couldn't independently say what that is and why they buy into it, you're not doing your job. If you're not taking that to the market and the market doesn't understand, and that isn't mirrored by what's happening internally, you're going to have a problem. And in all likelihood, if those things are not clear on your website, in your communication, on all levels, and regardless of that, in an interview, you can't work out whether the person is a fit, maybe that's your failing. What I think doesn't help in Britain currently is we all make mistakes.
mm.
You hire people that are not the right people. They are going to be the wrong people in the long term. And actually, again, that's going to be a problem for the business because you'll have a misfit
Mm,
internally which will fester. It won't work for the person inside the organization because they don't genuinely believe. And okay, there are some people that are so cynical they wouldn't care. But on the whole, I think to not have a situation where within 3 to 6 months you can't agree that something hasn't worked, make an offer financially in legislation to accept that and terminate with no fault
mm,
is a problem for everybody.
mm. Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to get right, is the other, my experience of it. On that, just to pick up another point you made, I mean, there's one issue about having people that don't fit. I get that. What about people that almost fit, if you like, where on the whole you've got a reasonably good fit, but there are areas where there isn't such a good fit. I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, the reason I've asked is I've dealt with performance management systems over the years, and they've been. I mean, it could be me, of course, but they haven't been tremendously effective in terms of you know helping people rapidly improve their performance. Most performance management systems that I've come across don't work particularly well. Um, what's your take on that? When you've got people that are almost right, that you think, well, but they need to improve a lot. I mean, what's your take on dealing with that issue, which is a slightly subtler, do we keep them or don't keep them? I mean, what's your take on that? Because the people bit's so important.
Yeah. So I think strangely, Paul, that might be collectively one of the best questions, because I think a lot of performance management systems are self-fulfilling.
Mm,
We need to have a system. We've got a system box.
yeah.
I won't think about whether that system is adding value or in truth being reflective of performance in a way which adds value to the employer and the employee and creates evident differentiation between the best performers and the not so good. I think there is a danger with AI and automation that will just simply become more out of control.
Mm,
So I think that, but also, our daughter just started at grammar school, and everybody gets a buddy. Now, the great thing with that, with technology, is our daughter Clemmy met her buddy physically, but because of social media, she interacted with her during the entirety of the summer holidays
Right.
before. So on day one, they knew they were meeting outside Sainsbury's in Marlow. She brought three of her closest friends with her. Now, you don't, you could have that in business. You can't now if people on day one you don't go to the office,
Mm.
giving your business cards. You're not,
Yeah.
um, and I think that, I mean, how do you fit in to a culture if you're never there and you're never with people, if you've never known what the culture was in the past?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It,
that's part of what was behind my question, really. I mean, one of the things that AI does is it does exactly what you tell it. I mean, I've in the past, I've had to manage people that have been great in lots of ways, but you ask them to do one thing, they go do something completely different. And that could be because I didn't explain myself clearly enough, or it could be that they're not listening, or it could be a combination of those two things, or it could be that they just don't want to, or they don't agree with me, or whatever. But the great thing about technology, you tell it go and do A, B, and C, and it does A, B, and C. I mean, and
it scales perfectly
yeah,
on a linear way, in a way that human beings don't, can't.
yeah,
Uh, but again, I think, Paul, it's very important that we give it the right tasks.
yeah,
Because technology only develops in a way that it consumes and digests the information we give it access to. It doesn't become a being, an active. I mean, look, it could possibly infiltrate the web and a bad actor in that place, but that could be human beings as well, create all sorts of problems. I mean, look at Jaguar, Land Rover, Marks and Spencers recently, etc. Um, but tech isn't going backwards, it's only going forwards at a faster and faster rate.
mm,
In my view, if we manage that correctly, it'll make the right humans more important, not less.
mm,
And I also think, and this is my view, not maybe nonsense, but I believe the human brain has a functionality of, let's say, 100. And if you're Elon Musk and you hyper over function in one quote, you have no choice under function in another. And to your point, some people will do things very well using their own nous, but other stuff you tell them to do, they won't. You either have to spend more time in that area to bring them back to where you need to be, or they'll never be that person.
mm.
But you play to their strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think it's going to it's going to have an interesting impact on the way we manage people when AI is, as it were, a component part of what everybody does.
$100.
It's going to change the way you have to manage people, partly because it's going to contrast I told AI to do A, B, and C, and it did A, B, and C, and I asked you to do A, B, and C, and you did X, Y, and Z. Yeah, so it's going to make a contrast there, which means the kind of human creativity bit has to really sparkle, for want of a better way of describing it, because that's the bit that humans bring to the table. And if
I
they,
think as well, Paul, it's how you ask questions and
yeah,
what questions you ask. Um, and when I ask AI things, it's um, yeah, I suppose it's basic. I want something done basically quickly
mm,
to give me the foundation for the job that I'm going to do as an architect after that. Um, so, it's not going to take me 3 weeks to start. I can start in 10 minutes.
mm, yeah. Let me ask you about your journey. I mean, when you look back on the experience you've had of developing Listening Co. Um, I mean, have there been any really interesting? I mean, I'm getting at I mean, I'm going to use the word inflection points where you've been working away, and all of a sudden you've kind of reached a crossroads or a junction and thought, do I go X? Do I go Y? You know, have you had any of those kind of moments on the journey that have really impacted on the way the business has unfolded?
Yes, I mean, uh, so in explaining what we were trying to develop and implement, a lot of reactions were, so essentially you're saying, I say to all my people, they must come back to work 5 days a week because I can't do that.
Mm.
Um, Now that's not what we're saying at all. In fact, a blend technology that has been an enabler for people to be on trains and in cars far less is actually a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
What we're trying to say is actually, no, you in management have to adapt what you're doing and evolve that to fit the current situation. Because unless you change that, there will then be uh, a challenge. And to go back to my point that frustrations not I tend not to be within functions but between them, I would say that for organizations as well.
Mm.
And interdepartmental relationships were always a bit fractious. They potentially become worse now. All up of that is that it can become or is in danger of becoming truly dysfunctional if you don't grasp it. And also, you know, maybe to become a CEO or a leader, you need a bit of an ego.
Mm.
It's difficult for people to say, I'm just challenged here. I feel somewhat in the dark. There's a pressure to get this right, and within that pressure, isolated, increasingly under pressure, and therefore the clarity that I need is missing,
Mm.
and I just some help.
Yeah. And I mean, is that what CEOs come to you for? I mean, is that how those conversations start? I mean, it's because it's a very interesting point you're making there about people essentially not being quite sure about what the way forward is. I mean, is that how these conversations start with your clients?
Um, Sometimes, I mean, too too often, not often, but still too often, people come to us when they not only hear the waterfall, they can see it. And at
Okay.
that point, two more paddles in the canoe, you're still going over.
Yeah.
And uh, and that that is a thing. And if change in the management change and evolution within the business is not within the DNA, you are probably going to fail anyway.
Yeah.
Um, because the pace of change in the market and demands are moving so
So
disproportionately.
fast, isn't it? Yeah.
We're all whitewater rafting now, whereas in the past we would paddle on the Thames.
Mm.
It's a very different circumstance today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me ask you about what I mean when you look back on that journey. I mean, what would you say you've learned from the experience? I know you've done quite a lot of things before doing this. I mean, if you were to go back to day one, I mean, what one thing would you do differently, perhaps? What sort of things have you learned along the way?
That's a great question. So part of me thinks I should have been much more aligned whilst doing my degree university as to what I thought I might do next. Lent into that more and have been more outcome focused.
Yeah.
And in which case, Paul, I might perhaps have gone into the law or a profession or sought to qualify to do something which by the way could also have been cutting hair. I mean,
Yeah.
something that you could take with you anywhere and
Yeah.
and whatever. I I mean, I don't know if it was wanderlust or because I did a geography degree. I studied the School of Oriental and African Studies and School of Eastern European Studies, and I ended up after university in Kenya and then South Africa and then Poland and Hungary and Russia and whatever. None of it was a greatly laid plan, but I've done some very interesting things. I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Central Europe, I've lived in Manhattan. You know, it's been very, very interesting. I've worked with some fantastic people, had some great times, and it hasn't all been a bed of roses. But they say when you look back on your life, make sure there's plenty to watch.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's a
so,
good way to put it,
you
actually.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's no great regret. It's been really, it's given me an awful lot of perspective. I'm not sure perspective and experience is as valued today as it used to be. And maybe the whitewater raft that I've been talking about has gone ahead at a speed and direction that has been faster than I could keep up with it. But you can't regret.
Yeah. Would you say, I mean, that's a really broad experience you've got there. Would you say that that's changed you as a CEO? Would you say you're a better CEO as a result of all those broad experiences?
Um, I think I'm a better person. Um, I think that uh, I have inherently a more informed way, broader lens of looking at things. Um, so I think, yes, wholeheartedly. But if I talk to 99.9% of people in London about the interesting and challenging and rewarding times I spent working in India and China, they'd glaze over
Yeah.
completely because it's not, it's not something that touches them. It's not hot and sour chicken or an onion bhaji. It's a whole. And I mean, if someone came to me and said, "Well, let me tell you about my weekend on Mars last weekend," well, it would be quite interesting for 10 minutes, I suppose. But you know, um, just depends. But also the other thing about the culture of me and the question you just asked, I'm not judgmental. I think I'm observant,
Mhm.
but I never want to be judgmental.
Mm. Which seems to me to be a pretty good thing to have developed. If that's the outcome of those experiences, that's a pretty good thing, it seems to me. Alex, thank you for taking a bit of time to share that story. Absolutely fascinating, really interesting. I mean, I personally think your point about the importance of listening to customers and listening to staff and doing that in a systematic way actually is really important to the way businesses are going to have to develop. Because the kind of not listening doesn't really cut it anymore. So it's kind of it's almost becoming part of the way you have to do business, really, which I think is probably a good thing. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing that story, and good luck going forwards.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Alex. Bye bye.